What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So, Nick, not a whole lot to talk about with regards to Charles Oliveira, Beneil Dariush. The fight didn't last very long. It was Charles as usual. He came out guns a-blazing, threw some big shots, and got the early finish. So rather than recapping a fight where not much happened other than utter domination, let's look forward now to UFC 294 because it certainly seems like that win set Charles up to fight Islam Makhachev in a rematch in Abu Dhabi, which is very enticing after that win against Beneil. Obviously, the odds makers have him a 3-1 underdog, and I understand that. Islam was able to get him down and choke him out in the second round, and seems like he could probably do it again, but you can never count out Oliveira.
No, absolutely not. And we're going to sound like broken records over here, but Charles Oliveira is one of the most entertaining fighters in the UFC.
For sure.
And I think that, you know, when you got people like Michael Chandler and Justin Gaethje in your division and you're constantly in the top 5 with them, everybody looks at them as the most entertaining guys. But Charles is, you know, he knew there was a lot on the line. He knew that if Benny won, he was going to get ushered back into the top 5 and Benny's going to get his title shot. Well, he was there to absolutely steal the show from Benny. He was ready to go in there and essentially say, well, if you guys are willing to give Benny the title shot, watch how bad I'm going to beat him and I'm going to become undeniable. And since the current layout of the 155 division is a little bit weird and pretty much everybody has their dance partners that would be likely number 1 contenders, it kind of feels like Charles Oliveira might just be the perfect next opponent for Islam. You know, they're going over to Abu Dhabi to do that big card towards the end of the year. And this lines up perfectly for Charles to have another healthy rest, recovery, and then a full camp again. And I think that even though we did see that fight and we saw, you know, the results, and I think that the results likely would wind up being the same if they fought again, I think, you know, if you're going to go off of merit, if you're going to go off Beneil Dariush deserved it because he did X, Y, and Z, I think you have to go the same way with Oliveira. And he's been a great company man for many, many years. He holds a ton of records in the UFC. He held the belt not that long ago. And if there's nobody else available that is, you know, maybe a squeaky wheel or somebody who's earned it off merit, you got to go with your former champ against the current champ.
No doubt about it. Charles is the number 1 contender. He deserves to get his rematch against Islam. And like you said, I do agree, I think Islam will probably win that fight because he matches up so well against Charles. Charles is very good from the bottom. Islam doesn't really play into the game of getting into a brawl with you. He's very calculated on the feet. He takes his time. He's patient and he looks for his takedowns. And he's just absolutely crushing from the top. And while Charles does have some really slick triangles and really good jiu-jitsu bottom game, it's very difficult to submit Islam Makhachev, if not impossible, to submit him from the bottom unless you've got him rocked with an up kick or something really strange like that. And anything could happen, and that's why we put on the fights, because a lot of times we think we know who's going to win, and we end up totally surprised. And I'm actually going to sit here and eat crow because I picked Beneil Dariush to win this fight, just as a side note. But Charles Oliveira surprised me, and I think he could surprise us again. But the thing about it is Charles has earned the title shot through his performances. He's finished 4 of the top 5 guys in the division, not just beaten them, but finished them. The only guy he's lost to was Islam. Everybody else in the top 5, he has not only beaten, but he has finished. Also, it lines up perfectly time-wise. He took no damage in that fight. You got Volk and Yair coming up, and it doesn't seem like even if Volk makes quick work of Yair, that they would throw the 145 champ right back in to a rematch against Islam, because 155 is so exciting. You can't have the champ defending against a featherweight 2 times in a row. They're going to put somebody fresh in there, and Dustin and Justin are going to throw down here in a couple of months, and all signs point to those 2 beating the absolute shit out of each other. So I think they're going to need some time off in between, you know, their fight and the Abu Dhabi card in October. So all signs point to Charles fighting Islam again, and I think it's going to be a great fight. I do think it's going to be more I think Charles is going to realize that this is his absolute last chance to ever be a champion again if he wants to regain that belt. I think he's going to take it super serious. I think he's going to come out guns a-blazing, and I think it's going to be a super exciting first couple rounds. And I will make a final prediction as the fight gets closer and when it gets announced, but I'm leaning towards Islam right now.
Yeah, it's hard not to go with Islam when you just saw these 2 fight not that long ago, and it wasn't all that competitive. You know, Charles Oliveira is a great fighter, and the evolution of his game has gone crazy through the years, but he didn't fight Islam all that long ago. And once you've been to the top of a division, you don't really see as big of improvements in a fighter's game. They're not near as noticeable as they are early on in their career when they're first getting their footing in the sport. But Charles Oliveira is certainly capable of giving a good fight to Islam Makhachev. I just don't think he has the style to beat Islam. And when you have somebody like Islam with the team that he has around him and the way they're able to develop a game plan and then stick to it, you really don't have much of a chance on the rematch against a guy like Islam or Khabib. You know, anybody that they fight, if they don't win the very first go, they're likely not going to win again, because if you give those guys 3 rounds or 5 rounds of what you like to do and all your tendencies, because in a fight you essentially have to show your cards.
Right.
You can keep them concealed until the fight comes, but you got to use your best moves and pull out all the stops when it comes time to fight. So they know exactly what Charles Oliveira wants to throw, what Charles Oliveira thinks would work on Islam. And I know every fight's different, and especially, you know, at the highest level, you're going to see some improvements and changes in the game plan. But I don't think Charles Oliveira and his team will be able to create a game plan tricky enough to beat Islam Makhachev. I think Islam knows how to beat him and would likely be able to do it again.
Yeah, you know, Javier Mendez and Khabib are both great minds, and both very different minds as far as their backgrounds and their coaching styles are concerned. But the one thing about those two guys that is absolutely that they have in common is that if you show your cards, as you said, in a fight over 5 rounds or 3 rounds, and they can dissect what you do, they are both masters at picking your game apart on the feet in regards to Javier, and on the ground and the takedown cage work aspect of things for Khabib. So, and then Islam himself, you know, I don't think we give Islam enough credit. We talk about Khabib a lot of the times being his mentor and coach, which he is, and Islam wouldn't be where he is today without Khabib, and same can be said for Javier. But Islam himself is a master at downloading the data, and so he will go back, having been the one who was actually in the cage with Volk, and take all of what he saw and kind of weave his camp specifically around that while still doing what he does best. And I think you're right. If you don't beat those guys on the first go round, it's almost impossible to take them in the second fight. And while I love Volkanovski and I like Islam too, but I'd love to see something shake up at 155 and an upset happen of some sorts, I just can't quite see it.
Yeah, unfortunately for all the other lightweights in the world, I just think that Islam and his team are a step above everybody. And that does sort of leave the division in a weird spot, because years and years have gone by, and we've always said the 55ers are the most difficult division you can possibly be in the sport. And right now, I think 135 is humming on all cylinders, and 45 looks as good as it's ever looked. Same can be said for 70. But 55 is sort of like the most stacked, for the longest period of time, consistently amazing division that the UFC has. And I feel like with Beneil Dariush getting finished the way he got finished, that sort of just put a halt on everything, because we kind of know who the good old boys of the 155 division are. You got Islam, you got, you know, Chandler's in there, Gaethje's in there, you know, Connor's always kind of in there, just, you know,
he's
by proxy.
Around,
he's sort of in there, even though he's not. He's always just one chirp away from possibly getting a fight. And I thought that we're going to maybe see Beneil Dariush crack into that group of guys, or maybe we'd see some of these new guys. We thought Fiziev was going to do it against Gaethje, you know, crash into that little small group of fighters that have constantly been fighting each other. But these guys prove that they are the best in the world that aren't Islam Makhachev. It's like there's 3 layers of 155. You've got the champion all by himself, and then you've got the top 4 guys that have been there for many, many years, Dustin Poirier, all of them, and then everybody else is in the division. And they're all really close to being as good as these 4 guys, but all these 4 guys are getting beat by the champion. So it does leave the division in a little bit of a weird position, because we did just see the same sort of thing with Khabib not too long ago. But it is an exciting division. I would like to see Islam Makhachev in there with as many different bodies as possible, because we never know how long he's going to be wanting to defend the belt. He's probably a lot like Khabib in the sense that he's going to do it as long as he feels it's necessary, and then once he's finished, he's going to give the belt away or do whatever he has to do to pass it on and move on to his next phase of life.
Yeah, or go up to 170, which I think is something we could see in Islam's future. But I almost look at it as a different way. And I know what you mean about Dustin and Justin and all of Michael Chandler, those guys that kind of sit at the top in bulk. But I look at it as sort of a 3-tiered system. And the way I see it is Islam Makhachev at the top of the mountain by himself, Charles Oliveira right underneath him by himself as well. And then the rest of those guys underneath there, and then the rest of the division kind of files in place after that. And it almost feels to me like Robert Whittaker, Israel Adesanya several years ago, because Charles, like we mentioned earlier in the video, has finished everybody else in the top 5, not just beaten him, but finished him. And then he gets worked over easily by Islam in their match and gets submitted. So, and same thing for Robert Whittaker. Robert beats everybody at 185, but then he gets in there with Adesanya and he loses every time. And so 155, to me, as much as I love Charles Oliveira and his style is so exciting, I feel like the division kind of hit the brakes a little bit with that knockout of Beneil Dariush, because we thought, well, maybe Benny's the guy to give Islam some weird looks. And then if Benny can crack in there and show a chink in Islam's armor, even if he doesn't defeat him, maybe Arman Sarukian can kind of weave his way back into things and try to get his rematch against Islam, or Matus Gamrot or somebody. But what you ended up seeing is, Benny beat Matus pretty handedly. And so then Charles gets in there with him, makes quick work of him. And it's like, okay, somebody that we thought might be a fight or two away from a title fight was shown sort of de facto as not being anywhere near the top of the mountain. And I know we're talking MMA math here and it doesn't always add up, but I think in this case it kind of does. Charles pretty much beats everybody that's not Islam, and Islam beats Charles almost every time. So 155, I think, is going to be very much like deja vu, because I think we're going to see Islam lay that belt down in the middle of the octagon when he's done, just like Khabib did, and that's going to be when the belt changes hands.
Yeah, those guys, they like to give the belt away when they're done with it.
Yeah.
Not when the belt's done with them, but when they're done with the belt.
Which is so rare.
Yeah.